Okay, folks, so I wanted to record another video. This one is actually not about anything very recent. This is actually just about Antifa in general. Whether or not Antifa is an organized group of people, is it just a random group of people? I'm sure that there's probably, like, individuals calling themselves Antifa all by themselves that are, not really organized in any specific group, but when people say that it's not anything, that there's no organized group of people that call themselves that, or that they don't ever get together and do anything, one of the points of this video is that I would say that's probably not the case. Now, the first thing I'm going to point out with this first clip is that if you look at this clip, you would think that this entire protest at the Columbus statue was throwing things at the police. And there's really, this is how you get people saying there were no peaceful protesters and such. So I'm going to play this for you and, take a look at what you're looking at here and consider the fact that this does end up basically making it look like the entire protest is attacking these cops. Now, one of the videos that I'm going to play later shows a little bit more of this situation, but if you were looking at this, it would be pretty ridiculous to suggest that this was somehow a peaceful protest. But, you also notice that despite the angle that this all comes in at, it doesn't, it does look like it's the whole protest. But, so, here's an aerial view, actually on one of these other tweet videos that I'm going to use, of that same situation. And I'm going to point something out to you that's also going to be pointed out in one of the later videos. So here you have an aerial view. And this is the same situation. There's this little cluster right here of people in all black using umbrellas. They were a little more tightly packed together earlier. But this is a formation, okay? I've studied a lot of shield wall tactics, usually just as part of one of my hobbies, just studying, like, Roman tactics and, how formations work. Not to mention the fireworks they're throwing, but, so there was, these are carts, and these carts have the objects that the police are having thrown at them. There's frozen bottles, PVC pipes that are actually sharpened. There's all kinds of stuff that the cops are going to talk about in their, video. But needless to say, you also can see there are all these other people that are not engaging in throwing stuff. It's primarily all coming from this little group here, all dressed in black with the umbrellas covering them to prevent them from being ID'd by cameras overhead. So, again, let's get to the police video that kind of shows how these people came together and gives you an idea of how all this works. I would also point out that actually before, and the cop's going to re-say it, but before these guys showed up, there were apparently peaceful protests for about an hour. And then this happened, and then an escalation happened after that where the police are finally fighting back. But the police also at this point, how are they going to know that it's not the entire protest attacking them? And more importantly, who benefits from this situation? That's what you should be asking yourself. So now I'm going to play this police video where they're doing a presentation about what happened at the Columbus statue. Now, I'm going to put up a disclaimer. I should have said this at the beginning. I don't think there should be a Columbus statue up. I think that's ridiculous. I live here in Michigan, and there's a statue of General Custer up I'd love to see taken down. There are certain people that I don't believe by any means should be honored by statues. It's not about that. This is about analyzing the fact that there was, in fact, an organized group of people who obviously planned. I would assume they had to have drilled it in some way before going. There's no way that a random group of people organized this, just on the fly. They had to have had a plan about it. They had to have had meetings. I'll let you just watch for yourself.
So prior to this video starting, we had about a 1-hour rally at Buckingham Fountain with people exercising their First Amendment rights with no issues. The video is going to kick in as they start marching southbound on Columbus Drive. This is an overhead view that shows the group walking southbound on Columbus from Buckingham Fountain toward the Columbus statue. As you can see, there's several thousand people. And I'd like to point out the size of the banners in the front, which are approximately 5 to 6 feet tall, and all connected by PVC pipe, which will become important later on. So here you can see minimal police presence at this location. We have police cars in the rear to protect the rear from any vehicles that may come up behind First Amendment protesters that walk down the streets, and they have been doing that throughout the last month and a half. This is where you see the crowd start to march into Grant Park behind the Columbus statue, so they would be just north of the Columbus statue heading into the park. Okay, here's where we see the protest take a turn for the worse and turn into a riot situation.
Now, take a moment, because this comes back. This is the same banner that was lined up earlier at the front of the protest. Now you see that cluster of people all wearing black? Okay, now they're pointing an arrow at this guy because he was dressed like this initially. He's going to come over here and he's going to change his clothes into black like Antifa garb. Anyway, I'll let the officer continue from here, but I just wanted to be sure that you are thinking about this and comparing it to the video that I showed you, because this is before that happened. Pay very close attention to the fact that these people had a plan. You know, this is not a random group of people who just happen to all be dressed in the same color who showed up at the same protest.
A lot of these individuals put up umbrellas and hid behind those banners among the foliage down the hill, so are shielded from our officers' sight who are on the ground. And as you can see where the arrow is pointing out, this is just showing an individual changing from his clothing into all black clothing. And you'll see as the video progresses how they form up and march toward the statue. So here, again, a lot of the protesters are moving in front to shield this group who are all changing clothes and preparing weapons to be thrown at the officers who are standing at the statue, which is approximately half a block away. And now, again, you see the protesters moving in a platoon-like fashion with the banner that is all connected by PVC pipe.
Okay, so again, when he means platoon-like fashion, that's the formation tactics I was talking about. And again, that's not something you can just go out and say, hey, let's go in formation and do this thing. No, that's something you practice. You probably drill it.
Towards the statue, and here's where they start marching south in Grant Park towards the statue. The PVC pipe is then taken apart from the banners, and a lot of that PVC pipe was sharpened on the ends to a point, which was being jabbed at the officers up when they get closer to the statue, and you'll see a video of that. Now they're forming up. You'll see the banners come down, and then they start moving. What you don't see from this video on the back end is a lot of the bicycles that are forming a wall around the bicycle behind. So here's a gentleman dumping out weapons to be thrown at the police, and immediately they start multiple felonies of throwing objects at the police who were standing on the statue.
I want to show that again, so I'm going to pause it. But they literally had weapons all ready to go, and the guy just poured them out, encouraging protesters to use them on the cops. Let's see that again.
So here's a gentleman dumping out weapons to be thrown at the police, and immediately they start multiple felonies of throwing objects at the police who were standing on the statue. We've seen frozen water bottles, frozen cans of different types of substances, rocks, explosive devices, and then obviously here comes the PVC with the banner that was broken apart and then jabbed at the officers. I want to point out that we've had multiple protests at the statue prior to this event that were all peaceful, and we respected everyone's First Amendment right to protest peacefully, but this was not, what you're seeing here was obviously an ambush on the police officers. So within the group, there are people pushing carts and holding bags that had the items to be thrown at police. So they had multiple restocking of items to throw at the police, weapons basically. And here's another look from the statue looking out southbound. You can just see the volume that the officers were under, the volume of attack. We had multiple officers injured, multiple officers concussed. Then I'd like to point out there's the sticks being thrown. The officers, at one point you'll see one of the officers move over, an incendiary device or an explosive device blows up near his eye, and you can see him walk away holding his eye. That officer's eye is damaged. He has to go back daily to have his eye checked by the eye doctor and may require surgery. It's going to happen here shortly. You'll see the officer in the white shirt, the sergeant, walk away holding his eye after that explosive device blew up in his eye right there. Here's more incendiary devices that were thrown at the officers. With that, I'll turn it back over to the superintendent.
So again, I want to take a moment and stress that you saw that there were enormous amounts of people in that crowd that were not participating in that. Now, here's the kicker. This is the problem that I don't think people are really addressing, which is that when people say things like silence is violence, you know, if you're not going to say anything about it, then you're part of the problem. That goes both ways. If you don't support violent protesting and you just stand by and let that group of people organize what was a very organized attack on a group of police officers, then, you know, if you're not going to do anything about it, then you're part of the problem. You know, if we want people to be, you know, we want to be able to hold people accountable for not doing enough to fight against police corruption or violence against black people or whatever, then you also can't just sit there and let something like that go on. And, you know, a lot of the people actually were just sitting there with their cell phones out, and that was the extent of their participation. But nobody was calling them out, and nobody was trying to stop them. And I don't recall seeing anybody, this is another major problem that I keep running into when I debate this on the internet, is that people are saying, well, that's not us, they don't represent us, but nobody calls them out. Nobody publicly says anything about it. They don't, not only do they not physically intervene, they don't say anything about it. So when they get upset that Black Lives Matter and Antifa are being portrayed as being a violent mob, but they don't do anything to prevent that from happening, they don't do anything to even condemn the behavior when it happens, it makes it difficult for anybody to buy that. It makes it difficult for anybody to believe that you're not complicit in it, or at least, you know, sympathetic to it in some way. So, but anyway, the main point is, the reason I wanted to make this video is that the people that are telling you things like, you know, there is no Antifa, or Antifa is not really an organization, or or Antifa is not, it has no central leadership or whatever. That was an organized attack. It wasn't an attack that would hold up in any kind of actual civil war, obviously, but that was an organized effort, right down to spilling the weapons out and, just the way that they formed up and stayed in formation the entire time. Those people had a plan before they ever even got to the park. And they were the spearhead of a peaceful march, what was supposed to be a peaceful march. So, again, if people are not going to spend any time calling this out, then you can't blame anybody for associating you with what's going on right there in front of you. I've noticed that this is a problem in general with Antifa, with Black Lives Matter. It was a similar problem in Occupy, because we were like a leaderless mob. So you're in this weird situation where you were free to say, well, those people don't represent us anytime somebody does something bad. But then you can say, well, yeah, those people were members of Black Lives Matter or Antifa or Occupy when they do something good. While that works for, like, soundbite kind of people, it doesn't work for intelligent people who are going to look at the situation deeper and say, no, I'm sorry, you are accountable because you didn't do anything about it. And this is kind of at the core of the problem that I don't think people realize. Now, there's another element to this that I've been hinting at for quite some time. And the reason that I think about this is that I was an activist back in 2008 when the Patriot Act was passed. And the Patriot Act, along with the Military Commissions Act and a lot of different post-9/11 pieces of legislation that passed, were designed specifically to deal with domestic terrorism as a major threat. The Timothy McVeigh bombing was another major contributor to that. So the majority of the Patriot Act's negative stuff that could be pulled on a regular citizen doesn't go into effect unless you become a an enemy combatant. But if you get labeled a domestic terrorist, which actually there's provisions in the Patriot Act even for the president himself to make that decision, like without even Congress or the Senate, then you can be stripped of your citizenship and then carted off to secret prisons presided over by secret tribunals. That stuff has been in the waiting, like all the way back since 9/11. And when you guys allow yourselves to either be complicit and allow people to be violent on your behalf, do destruction on your behalf, arson, then inevitably you are becoming associated with terrorism. Back in 2008, we used to joke about it all the time as independent journalists, like, I'm sure I'm on a terrorist watch list somewhere. And this stuff has all just been waiting to be used. I'm actually kind of surprised that Trump hasn't used it yet. And it's just a matter of time, because one of the other problems that I don't think you guys you realize you're creating is that public sentiment for getting the police and the military to act against you is getting more and more popular all the time. You're not having the effect that you think. Burning down some buildings and fighting some cops who've been ordered not to shoot you is not you engaging in a glorious battle. You're not Viet Cong, you're not Taliban. You're basically at this point a group of kids throwing bottles. And that's not going to go the same for you if police are ordered to shoot you. It's not going to go the same for you if you get labeled a terrorist and end up in Guantanamo Bay, although I guess they've closed that, or some other secret prison. And I feel that there are somebody, I think that there are elements on the left and the right to some degree that want to do this, but there is somebody who is trying to manipulate the left into getting civil rights activism, and anti-corporate activism labeled a terrorist ideology. And once you can pull that off, all kinds of legislation that's been set in stone well before this will suddenly come into effect, and you'll be asking yourself, what the hell just happened to my rights? Well, your rights are gone now because you're a domestic terrorist, and because you scared the populace into not having support for your cause, they're going to be clapping as the cops finally cart you off. Again, that's not how I want it. That's not what I want it to be. But you guys aren't listening. You don't realize the larger implications of what's going on around you. And you're not thinking. That's one of the biggest problems that's going on right now that drives me crazy. People are not thinking. You don't realize that you're being manipulated. And everything has become so polarized that you can't even have an intelligent conversation that in any way deviates from what your group wants you to be saying. And this is true of the right, and it's true of the left, and it's out of control. And the less people are thinking, the easier it is to manipulate the mob. This is actually a Chairman Mao tactic. When Mao took over China, he would basically send out provocateurs to cause mass chaos because it's easier to mold a group to major changes, including totalitarian ones, if you can create mass chaos. Yeah, everybody's thinking, well, major changes would be good. Well, the problem is that the kind of major changes you're going to get by causing chaos are going to be people who are going to be more comfortable with you taking whatever measures that you want to make everything safe and peaceful. And that's how you get people to agree to fascism or totalitarian communism, neither one of which do you actually want. So think about that, folks.